Shalom friends, Rabbi Akiva here, and in this week's Torah portion, Terumah, we begin to learn about the details of what is called the Mishkan, the Tabernacle, the traveling sanctuary that the Israelites built and used to serve God for the 40 years in the desert and then for hundreds of years in the land of Israel once they arrived there. This is the predecessor for the temple that would be built by King Shlomo many hundreds of years later. When we begin to learn the different details of the different pieces and parts and building materials of this Mishkan, of this tabernacle, what they were used for, and how they were all directed towards the same purpose, the same mission, which was to worship God, to serve God, but also to bring godliness into the world. All of these different pieces and parts of the Mishkan that, again, we begin to learn about in this week's Torah portion really have one matara, one goal, one vision in mind, and that really is to bring more holiness, more goodness, more godliness into the world in order to fulfill the Jewish mandate of Tikkun Olam. Now, many people ask the question, at least in the Jewish vegan community, what about the sacrifices? Why were there sacrifices in ancient times? Why does Judaism have animal sacrifices in our past? And it's a very, very good question. It's a very strong question. And I think it's important to be aware of that, to recognize that it's very hard for us in modern day times to understand, to imagine that our people thousands of years ago were bringing animal sacrifices every single day, first in the Mishkan, and then later in the temple, both temples, the first and second temple. And I think it's important to look at a specific source from Maimonides, who really explains it in the historical context. Because on some level, let's be honest, it doesn't feel like such a Jewish thing to do. But Maimonides, hundreds of years ago, explains that thousands of years ago, the entire world was doing animal sacrifices. They were bringing animal sacrifices as part of their religious worship in their polytheistic and pagan kind of way. And Maimonides explains that God was worried because the whole world was doing it, that if the Israelites didn't have some form, some kind of system of animal sacrifices, of bringing animal sacrifices, which again was the way humans worshipped and did their religious rituals back then, that they, the Israelites, would stray after the other nations, leaving behind monotheism, leaving behind Torah and Judaism, this new spiritual path that they were bringing into the world. And God, of course, did not want that to happen. So God gives them a system, a way of bringing animal sacrifices, but in a very, very specific manner. Many rules, many specifics, only in one place. First the Mishkan, the tabernacle, and later the temple. And all kinds of rules need to be followed in order to bring the sacrifices properly. Right? So it's an interesting insight through the lens of Maimonides as to why we ever had it in our system. I think it's also very important to recognize that for most of Jewish history, the Jewish people did not bring sacrifices, right? Why? Because once the temple was destroyed, there was no way to bring sacrifices. Sacrifices were only able to be brought in Jerusalem in the temple. Once the first temple was destroyed, right, and then later the second, there was no more opportunity. And if you look at Jewish history, about 2/3 of Jewish history is without animal sacrifices because of the absence of the Jewish temple in Jerusalem. I think it's also important, as we're starting with this Torah portion Terumah and learning about all the different pieces and parts of the tabernacle, the Mishkan, and again later the temple, to realize that there is way more than just the sacrifices in the Mishkan and in the temple that stood in Jerusalem. It wasn't only about sacrifices. There were many things that happened every single day that were very, very important that had nothing to do with bringing animals as sacrifices. But let's remember that there was an entire inner part of the temple called the Heichal, the sanctuary. And in there, no animal sacrifices took place. All the animal sacrifices took place outside in the open courtyard, in the open air. Inside, once you came into this building, there were 4 things that took place there. Right away, you met this small mizbech, this small altar on which incense were burned every single day for a pleasant smell to the temple. Incense obviously coming from plants. To the right side, you had a table or tables filled with something called the showbread, lechem hapanim, and a special bread that was baked every single week, kept on these special tables all week, and eaten on Shabbat by the Kohanim, by the priests. Bread, plant-based. Go to the left side, across from the tables, you had the menorah. You had the golden menorah, and what was lit there? Olive oil. every single day. The menorah was it to bring spiritual light into not only the temple, but also into the entire world. So these first three things, all plant-based, right? The fourth part of the sanctuary, this inner part of the temple, was the Holy of the Holies, which kept the Ark of the Covenant in the first temple, which inside of that kept the remnants of the Ten Commandments. And nobody went in there except for the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, on Yom Kippur. So you see this inner part of the temple completely plant-based, completely without animal sacrifices. And it's an interesting thing, because if you do like an above view of the temple, and first again the Mishkan, later the temple, you see outside in the outer part were the animal sacrifices, and in the inner part there are no animal sacrifices. It was incense, it was bread, it was light, right? And in Judaism, the inner part of anything is the essential part, is the most important part, right? Is the absolute part. So even in the temple, you see the outer part, which is considered on some level less important, right? That's where the sacrifices were brought. They obviously were a mainstay, a main part of the daily service that was done in the temple for sure. But the fact that they're on the outer, on the external part of the temple says something. There's a message there. There's a hidden message there, right? On the inside, in the Heichal, in the sanctuary, that's the essential part, right? That's the most holy part, right? And as you go into the sanctuary, you get to the holiest of the holiest places, right, which nobody can go into all year round except for on Yom Kippur and only the high priest. So we really get a sense for the Mishkan, for the temple, right, what it was trying to do, what it was trying to accomplish, right? It's helping us to focus on the inner, right, on the essential, right, and get past the external. And just because we had animal sacrifices in the past doesn't mean, obviously we don't have them today, but it also doesn't mean that we'll have them in the future. There is a belief in Judaism of third temple, right? We pray for it every single day, right? But what will be in that third temple? Right? People talk about it, there's all kinds of ideas, but we won't know until the time comes. In my humble opinion, I can't imagine that the Jewish people are going to start bringing animal sacrifices again after thousands of years of not doing that, and after the world has changed radically and nobody does that. Right? It just wouldn't fit. In the Messianic age, in the age of global peace and goodness and justice, we're going to kill animals every single day to bring them as sacrifices. Right? It doesn't add up. Doesn't make sense in my eyes and in the eyes of very well-known Torah commentators. Right? So I think the essential piece that we can get out of this week's Torah portion is, right, this inner aspect of the temple. What happened in the temple, in the Mishkan first, besides the animal sacrifices. And to end with this, I think it's really amazing and beautiful and important to see that there's all different kinds of materials and resources used, right? From wood to different kinds of fabrics and colored fabrics and metals, all kinds of resources used to build this one Mishkan, this one tabernacle, right? In order to serve the one God, to bring the holiness, the godliness of that one God into the world. And it really leaves us with this very important message of using this up in our lives, using the objects, the material objects in our lives for goodness, for holiness, for an elevated purpose. Why do I have what I have? How am I using what I have? Right? Am I using what I have for goodness, for holiness, to make this world a better place? Right? We just started the month of Adar, which is all about increasing joy in the world. Am I using what I have, what I own? Am I using my possessions to make the world a more joyous place, to bring more joy to others? And when I say others, I don't only mean humans. Of course, I mean humans, but also to other creatures, all creations, all of creation. Right? That's what the Mishkan really is. It's another great teaching that the Mishkan teaches us, how to elevate our physical possessions for spiritual purposes, right? To use what we have, and through what we have, I bring more joy to the world and bring more fixing and healing to the world. And of course, when it comes to our food choices, right? It's one of the greatest and most powerful examples. To use my food as a conduit, as a way, as a vehicle towards bringing more joy to the world, to all members of this world, to all living creatures and creations of this world. And through my food choices, make this world a better place. All the best, my friends, and Shabbat Shalom.